Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1085B, and today's date is September 26, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. Government Becoming Desperate in the Middle East and Moving Closer to Creating a Major Event. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, we can see the U.S. government central bankers, they are creating chaos throughout the country. Well, it's in certain areas, but the corporate media is making it look like there's a rash of mass shootings. We have bombings in New York and New Jersey. And we can see that this is accelerating, and we're seeing more and more come out during a very short period of time. And that is a signal that they're trying to create this instance of riots, of mass shootings, of bombings. They're trying to create chaos to convince the American people that we have a major problem. And it looks like it's building up. We know the presidential debates are tonight. We'll have to see how this goes. And we have to remember, we have to watch how this all plays out, because they're watching the polls. And I'm not talking about the corporate media polls. I'm talking about the shadow polls that they use to gauge how the people are going to vote. Because they can only manipulate the voting if it's within a certain parameter. If it's too separated, if it's too far apart, they cannot manipulate the votes. They can try, but it's going to be very obvious, and it's going to be a problem if they do that. And this is why I'm thinking that the U.S. government central bankers, they're going to be pushing the idea that we need to create a natural emergency type of scenario to postpone the elections. And this all depends on how the polls go, how far apart they are, but we can see we're heading in that direction. We know we're approaching October. We know there's an October surprise. We've had this shooting in the Cascade Mall. We know this person had many run-ins with the law. We know this person was zombie-like. And very interestingly, is that this might have been an active shooter drill, because there were tents, there were porta potties in that area. People were left in the mall, and many people never even saw ambulances or anything else take the people away that were shot. So we can see right now, this entire story doesn't make sense. And then the person was just walking around, and he was picked up. He was not armed, and they brought him in. And we know that the law, the FBI, they were in contact with this individual. And then we had another instance of a shooting in Houston. They brought in the bomb squad, but it kind of looks like that this might have been something else, because it looks like it had to do with a lawyer, and it looks like he had an issue with his law firm. But of course, what we can see right now, they will use all of this to create the idea that we have all of these problems happening at the same time. And right after these debates, most likely we're going to see this accelerate. We're going to see more of this. Might not be shootings, it might be bombings, it might be something else, but we're going to see more chaos, because they need to create this narrative that we're approaching a point where there's so much chaos that the U.S. government central bankers, they need to step in. And this is what we've been watching. We see North Korea. Well, the U.S. has sanctioned North Korea over and over and over. And we see right now the United States has taken the next step. They have sanctioned a Chinese industrial machinery and equipment wholesaler, where the U.S. is saying they were supplying parts and equipment to North Korea to create their nuclear weapons. So they're already reaching out and sanctioning China, just like they're sanctioning certain entities in Russia. It's funny, because Obama, when he lifted the sanctions off Cuba, he says sanctions don't work. But it's amazing how they can place sanctions on Syria, Iran. They can place sanctions on Russia. They can place sanctions on North Korea. They can place sanctions on China when they continually tell us that they don't work. Well, over all these years, do they work? Well, it doesn't seem like they actually do. We see out in the Philippines, Duterte, well, it looks like he is moving closer and closer to Russia and China and moving away from the U.S. Now, Duterte said that he will still have ties with the U.S., but he is seeking to move closer with Russia and China. And he added that the ties with the U.S. would not be broken completely, only driven to a point that would allow Manila to have an independent policy. Because basically what's happening is the United States government central bankers, they're trying to tell him what to do. And of course, we're already seeing there might be a coup d'etat now. There's going to be sanctions. And it's going to probably get very ugly in the Philippines. Remember, they want all these different countries in the South China Sea to be as one, to encircle China. And it looks like this is starting to break up in that area. We see out in Germany, the U.S. military is planning to triple its forces deployed in Ansbach, Germany. And it looks like the region is going to become the hub for units to be moved into the Eastern Europe. And it looks like they're trying to bring in about 2,000 troops to this area. Now, we know the United States government central bankers, they are moving more and more missiles into Eastern Europe. The United States is bringing in nuclear weapons into this area. And Russia right now is preparing to counter this. Russia is going to be setting up their ICBM division. And these are the RS-24 Yars missile systems. And they are equipped with thermonuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles that can carry up to 10 independently targetable warheads. And we can see they're bringing them right up to the border to counter what NATO is doing. Now, what we can see happening at this point is that the U.S. is inching closer and closer to the border of Russia. Of course, they're using the excuse it's Russian aggression. They're looking to start something. They want war. And this is what they're continually doing. But you have to remember the way Russia looks at it. The U.S., they are bringing weapons right up to the border in all these different countries, bringing in more military assets. And Russia hasn't taken their missile systems and moved them outside of their country and brought them to the border of the United States. Because if that has happened and Russia placed their missile systems on the border of Mexico or the border of Canada with the United States, how would the United States react? They'd say, okay, something's going on here. Why did you just put missiles facing us? Is there a problem here? And we can see from going back in time that the United States is violating the treaty that they had with Russia. Russia continually calls the United States out on this. But it doesn't matter at this point because the United States government central bankers, they are provoking war at this point. They are moving military assets into position. They're inching closer and closer to provoke Russia, China, North Korea. And all of this is being done on purpose. We've been following this for many years right now. And we've seen a mass amount of military assets moved into certain regions to provoke these countries. Because as this system falls apart, they need to provoke a war to cover up this entire system collapsing. And this is exactly what they're going to do. They're not going to stop. We see out in the Middle East, the situation is not going well for the United States. Yemen is a complete disaster. Libya, complete disaster. Lebanon, a complete disaster. Iraq, Syria. And just like in Libya, where they brought in the unity government and they moved the central bank to a different location, they're doing the same thing in Yemen. Right now, the central bank was located in Sana'a. And they decided, you know something, so the Houthis have control of this area. We're going to move the central bank because the puppet government is in Aden, So they're moving the central bank now to this new location so they can continue with business. Because this is all they care about. They don't care about the people. They don't care about anything else but the central bank, their puppet government, and keeping the dollar on the oil. And they've done this twice now. And what we can see happening right now is they're losing control, they're becoming desperate, and they're just trying to save the central bank to continually conduct business. But when this falls, this is when everything comes to a screeching halt. Now, we understand that Turkey is having economic problems. This is why they decided to make amends with Russia to get the Turkish Stream pipeline going once again, to have trade with Russia, because their economy is failing. And many of the countries, the private Western Central Bank countries, their economies are failing. Right now, Moody's, they downgraded Turkey's credit to junk level. They're warning of an economic crisis in Turkey. And we can see right now that throughout the Middle East, it's all in a crisis. All these countries are ready to collapse. The only way they're staying afloat is because the central banks keep pouring currency into the countries. Look at Ukraine, for instance. Cut off the central bank, the country implodes. They're done. They're all in collapse mode. But we can see that the U.S. government central bankers, they are still trying to move forward with their goals. They're trying to get Assad. They are not giving an inch, no matter if they're beaten. No matter if the Islamic State is moved out of the country, they are not going to leave. We can see it right now. Even if the government of Syria says there is no reason for you to be here, please leave our country, it looks like they're not going to leave because they need to reach their goal and then move into Iran, of course. And we can see right now the U.S., Turkey, they're supporting all the terrorist groups. They're dropping military aid to the terrorists. They're giving them military assets to use on the battlefield. And there were 2 military aircrafts that were spotted, and they flew right over, and they dropped supplies for the terrorists and for the moderate rebels, which are part of the terrorist groups. And we can see right now, they're continually supplying these groups. Now, the Syrian government is saying, listen, we're going to fully restore and control Aleppo. And what's happening right now is that with Russia's help, the Syrian armed forces, they are pushing the moderate rebels, the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, out of Aleppo. Now, the U.S. is desperate. They need to keep Aleppo. They want their safe zone with Aleppo included. This is a strategic area, and they're becoming very desperate at this point. And it seems that they're doing whatever they possibly can. They're blaming Russia for the humanitarian aid hit, which Russia's saying, listen, we didn't hit them, please prove it. Actually, we know you have one of your drones flying over there. We know the UN humanitarian aid convoy was in the militant zone where your terrorists are. There was also a truck driving by that had munitions in it. And where are the craters if someone bombed them? It looks like these trucks were put on fire. Someone took them, lit them up. And we can see right now, all of this is a cover-up. Everything the U.S. is doing in the UN, saying that Russia's barbaric, Syria is barbaric, they hit a humanitarian aid convoy. This is all propaganda. This is all a smokescreen to cover up on what they did with the terrorist group. Because what has come out now is that the Syrian intelligence, they are saying they possess audio recordings they intercepted between the U.S. and the Islamic State. telling the Islamic State fighters when the bombing was going to happen, when it was going to be finished, and when to attack. Now, they haven't released these audio recordings as of yet. We're waiting to hear these recordings to see if this is exactly what it is. But this would be very, very damaging once these are released. There was an unnamed senior al-Nusra front commander said, yes, we receive weapons from the United States, particularly the BGM-71 TOW anti-tank missile, and the missiles were handed over directly to us from the American side. So we can see already things are rapidly falling apart for the United States government central bankers. And they're trying to cover this up with this whole thing that's going on with Russia right now about the humanitarian aid. And the U.S. is trying to bring up the idea that Russia should be brought up on charges with war crimes. And of course, the U.S. still has no proof. They presented absolutely no proof at the United Nations Security Council to show that Russia did this. All they have is trucks that were on fire, humanitarian aid that was burned, and nothing else. And they have the compromised White Helmet Group, which saw nothing in the dark. And we can see right now that the situation is intensifying. And the United States government central bankers, they are prepared to push this to the next level. They already have NATO. They're going to be deploying AWACS aircraft to the Middle East as early as October. They're going to bring in 3 of them. And they're going to be monitoring the entire area. They're going to be conducting surveillance, gathering intelligence, and it's going to be shared across all members of the coalition forces. So they're planning on doing something much, much larger, because who needs these AWACS planes? Is it the moderate rebels? Is it the Al-Qaeda group? Is it the al-Nusra group? No, the terrorists don't need it. You only need this type of surveillance, intelligence, if you're going to do something much, much larger, with more forces, with coalition forces. And we can see right now, this is where they are headed. So the United States is backed against the wall. And we can see right now that they're planning something much, much larger than we've ever seen before. What this will be, we don't know. But they're going to have to do something pretty darn big to allow them to bring in a lot more forces and to start attacking the Syrian forces and the Russian forces. Because their terrorist groups, they are no match for the Syrian forces and the Russian forces right now. And they tried helping out the Islamic State by bombing the Syrian army, and the whole world looked at this and said, hey, what's going on here? But they're running out of time, because as we can see, this economy is deteriorating very rapidly. Things are falling apart. We have the debates coming up tonight, and we know right after this, things are going to really accelerate. And I'm not just talking about the economy, I'm talking about the chaos and how the United States is also losing ground in the Middle East. Everything is all coming together at once. And this is why I do believe that this bill for justice against Saudi Arabia was completely planned. We know the 9/11 bill was vetoed by Obama. And that is the bill for justice for the American families. And it gives them the right to sue Saudi Arabia. Now, the Senate, the House, they're saying, listen, we're going to look for a majority and we're going to push this through, and it will be veto proof. Now, if they do that and they decide, okay, we're going to do this, and they get this through, What do you think is going to happen at this point? Well, we know what's going to happen. Saudi Arabia has already told us what they're going to do. They're going to sell U.S. assets. They're going to sell U.S. treasuries. And something very interesting is that this was a movie back in 1981 called Rollover, where Saudi Arabia went ahead and sold U.S. assets. And as they sold the assets, the entire system just imploded. Everything was wiped out in a split second. Now, if Saudi Arabia really wanted to destroy America, all they'd have to do is sell their assets. They wouldn't have to bring down the World Trade Center. They wouldn't have to do that. And why would they want to do it? They're making a lot of money off of this system. There's no motive for Saudi Arabia to do this. And we can see right now the central banks, they will use this to set up the American people as the scapegoat this time. If this goes as they want it to go, this is exactly what's going to happen. So these 28 pages that were released, this was all orchestrated to make it look like Saudi Arabia brought down the towers, which we know there were many other parties that were included in this, but they kept on telling everyone that we have these 28 pages or so, and it implicates Saudi Arabia. So then people were like, we need to see this. We need to see this. How dare you keep it hidden from the American people? And then eventually what they did, it's like a dangling carrot, they released them. And then all of a sudden, people wanted to sue Saudi Arabia. And Congress went right ahead. They created this bill. And of course, Obama said, no, I'm going to veto this. Because the central banks, they know what's going to happen. They know that if Saudi Arabia goes ahead and they sell their assets, this economy comes tumbling down. Now, the economy's failing anyhow. We're in a recession, moving into a depression. The clock is ticking. They know they need to bring this system down. And what better way is there than having Saudi Arabia sell the assets, destroy the economy, because we didn't see this coming. That's what the central bank will say. And they can turn around and say, listen, this is Congress's fault. Congress voted on this. They were listening to the people. So actually, the people of the United States, they created this crisis. And we can see we are moving in this direction. Now, we need to watch very carefully what happens in the Senate, the House, and we need to see if this is a majority where it is veto-proof. Then we can see that this is going to mimic the Rollover movie, which was out in 1981, where Saudi Arabia sold all the assets. And at this point, what do you think the central bank is going to do? Well, the central bank is going to say, listen, we didn't expect this to happen, but we have a plan. All we need is more control of the system. All we need is legislation to allow us to buy equities, take more control of the banks, take more control of the economy, and everything will be fine. We will create currency out of thin air, and we might have to go as high as 14 trillion. And we can see this is playing right into their hands. This is exactly what they want. They can blame this on the people. They can make it look like they're repairing the economy. At the same time, as our economy continually implodes, they can blame the rest of it on Russia, China, North Korea. Because as the central bank tries to improve the economy, and with all the quantitative easing and everything they're doing, it's not really going to improve the economy. I mean, it'll help the banks, keep the stock market up, but the rest of the people around the country, it's going to be a complete disaster. And they know this. So what they need to do is they will need to create an event that will explain away why their system and what they're doing is not working. And this is where Russia, China, North Korea, they all come into play. Because they can explain away the cyber attacks. They don't even have to prove it. All they have to do is make an announcement on the corporate media, and everyone will believe this is why the banks are being shut down. Because the banking system was just hit. And once the banking system is just hit, the central bank's going to ask for more control until they get all of it. Now, is this going to improve the economy? Absolutely not. What will this do? It will give the central bank huge control of the economy over the government, over the people. They'll have their players lined up of who we need to go off to war with. And they can explain away why this economy crashed. It was because of the people who wanted to sue Saudi Arabia. Remember, Obama said, no, don't do it. This is a bad move. The economy came crashing down. They were pumping it back up. We almost saw improvement, which there will be none. Then all of a sudden, Russia, North Korea, China, doesn't matter what player it is, they hit us with a cyber attack. We have to close the banks. And of course, according to the government, new regulations, we cannot bail out the banks. So we will have to use bail-ins. We just happen to have this handy-dandy document right here that allows us to do bail-ins. And we can see how this might play out in this scenario. And it looks like we're heading in this direction, and it's upon us right now. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.